In this video, I'm going to walk you through some of the basics of working with Radiant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the introduction to Radiant.html file, which you should have on Dropbox. And so I've printed out a copy for myself, and I'm so going to just walk through the instructions in there. Now and then I'll probably flip back to this HTML file, but basically what I'm doing is just going step by step through this document and following its suggestions. So where do I get the data and other things that are going to be used as part of this tutorial? Well, that's from your GitLab projects dashboard. And so there's should again be two versions of the repo available on your dashboard. One is the one for which you only have reporter privileges, right? That's the class copy, if you will, the original that the instructor provided, aka me. And the other one, which is your copy, the one that we forked for you, for which you have maintainer privileges. So let's go there, choose to clone that, and then in our studio, we'll start up git gadget, and in clone, paste in that URL, and then clone. Okay. And so now what it should do is open back up our studio, and yep, here we are, RSM ICT Radiant. And so now here is also the HTML file, here is the intro file, the same one that I'm working through now, and an RMD version, which is what you can open up and then knit to generate an HTML file. Okay, all right. So, and what I'm starting off with is where we're starting here. So starting and stopping Radiant. I recommend starting Radiant from the add-ins menu in our studio, and you can stop it by clicking on the power icon. So let me show you how that would work. So we're in our studio, add-ins drop down, scroll down, and here you see start our studio. All right, so that's how we can start it. So let's do that. You see what that actually does is it just runs a command here from the console, which is Radiant, : Radiant. And so that starts up Radiant for us. And now if we want to quit Radiant again, we can click on this power icon and then on stop. Okay, and so now we're back in our studio. You can see that basically again what happened is all that does, that add-ins command here, is just run this command right here. That will start up Radiant, which basically will open up a new tab in your browser running the Radiant interface. And at the end here it said it stopped. All right. Now let's just start that back up again. Through add-ins, start Radiant, and now let's start working through the different components. Actually, I'm going to stop first because the first thing that it asks is here is use import dataset in our studio to load portfolio XLS into the global environment. All right. So what am I talking about here? This is import datasets in the environment tab here on the top right. So let's click on that. From Excel, because we're going to start loading an Excel file. So now let's browse to that Excel file, which is in the Data Manage tab. Here it is, Portfolio XLSX. Open that. And now it's giving us a preview of what that's going to look like. So this is a nice feature in our studio that can help you upload some different data sets. And you'll see in a second here that this is the commands, the set of commands that it would need to run that particular import activity, and so you get the Portfolio XLSX file loaded into Radiant as a data frame. You notice, by the way, here that it's using a relative path, which is the type of thing that we like. All right, so here we now have a view of the Excel data, and now I'm going to start up Radiant again and show you how I can pull this information that's available now in our studio, in the global environment. You can see here the portfolio data frame, right? That's being shown here. That's available in our global environment, and I want to make sure that I can get that into Radiant. So add-ins, start Radiant. And by default, you'll see that there's just two data sets that are available, right? A Diamonds data set and a Titanic data set, and you can use this for a bunch of different examples and just to play around with the application. But what we want to do now is load a new data set. But this is not a data set that's in a particular format that we can easily load. So it's not a CSV or an RDS or RDA file. It's actually part of the global environment, global workspace in our studio. So if I select from global workspace, we'll see that there is a data frame available in the global workspace called portfolio. And I am going to move that. So I can either copy it, which means there's going to be a copy in the global environment still in RStudio, or delete it from there and move it purely into the environment that Radiant is working with. So we're going to do that. Okay. So now what should happen, let's double check if that's the case. Yep. So now in the global environment, we see that the portfolio data frame is no longer available here. Okay. So back to Radiant. So here is now our portfolio data set. It says here there's no description of this data, which makes sense because now we just know that this says Coca-Cola returns. We don't know where that's coming from. The name of the file was portfolio, so probably this is something to do with stock returns, but we don't really have much of a description of what that does. Okay. Now the next phase is to, and this is the next part of the document again, the introduction to Radiant. The next thing it asks is load the houseprices.rds file from data manage. Okay, so I'm going to select load data of type, click on load, and here's our file browser, data manage, and you'll see here that the data types that we could load, and so house prices is the one that it asks for. So let's click on that, and here we have house prices. And so this is a data frame as well. And one of the nice things is that the saved file already had some information attached to it about what type of variables were in the data file. Right? So I can see price at which the house was eventually sold in US dollars, square feet, foot area in square feet, and so on. Right? So there's some additional information that's been provided there. And I'll show you in a little bit how you can add information like that to your own data sets. All right, now we just loaded this data set from our hard drive, from the project that we're working on, so RSM ICT Radiant. And what I'd like to do is make our report that we're going to make reproducible, and so I need some R code for that. So what is the R code that Radiant used to load this data in? And so if we click here on Show R code, we'll see here that this is the R code that it used. So it used the reader library, read_rds, to load this data set from the data manage. Again, this is a relative path. And then there's this extra command that you see here, which is specific to Radiant, which is register that data frame as one that's going to be available going forward from the datasets dropdown. Okay, so without that command, the data frame would be available inside Radiant, but you wouldn't be able to select it from any of the dropdowns. Okay, so now I'd like that R code to be stored somewhere in a way that I can start developing a reproducible report. So the way you do that is you can hover over this little icon here on the bottom left of your screen. It says report results. So when I click on that, I'm going to be taken to report RMD, which means that I'm going to generate a report in R Markdown format. And you can see that this is the code that we had up front there. This is the same R code that will allow us to load the house prices data set into R, assign that data frame to a variable called house prices, and make sure that it's also registered so it can be available from the dataset dropdown. Okay. Now, there's a subset of files that you can load through the Data Manage tab, but you can basically load a whole bunch of different types of files a little bit more flexibly by clicking on Read Files inside Report RMD. So let's click on that. And what is in the intro.html document is let's load the sales.csv file from the Data Manage directory. Okay, so here's sales.csv. And what happens when I click on that and I select it is the dataset isn't actually loaded, but the code that is needed to load the dataset is now provided inside the Report RMD tab. Okay? So if I go back to Data and Manage, I'll see that there is no sales dataset listed here. But once I run this code, and if I want to, for example, just run this code chunk and not the previous ones, I could either select this and then click on Knit Report. Or if my cursor is here at the start of the code chunk, I can press Control Enter or Command Enter or even Shift Enter. All of those will work, and that will run this. That will run the same code chunk. Okay. All right. So now let's take a look at our dataset dropdown, and there we go. Sales is now one of our datasets. Okay. So here's the sales information. We made sure it was registered, so it's part of the dataset dropdown. And now the next step in our URL, or in our document, is to load a file directly from our URL. So this is another possibility, that instead of just files that are available locally, you can actually also load files directly from a URL. So this is a file that I have available on GitHub. It's another CSV file. And I can load that directly from the server, from the GitLab server, onto Radiant by selecting CSV URL and then pasting here the URL to that file. Now let's click on load. And now we see that the file has been loaded for us. And you can see here, this is a little bit more involved. This is the code that was used to pull the information from that remote file on a remote server, pull that into Radiant directly. All right. Let's see. Okay. So we've got sales. There's a couple of different other ways in which you can load data from various different sources. So you could load, for example, directly from Dropbox. The only thing to remember is if you ever get a share for a Dropbox file, it'll usually have a 0 at the end. And to make this work with pretty much anything in R, you have to change that 0 to a 1. But otherwise, it'll work just fine. Okay? You could also, for example, through this particular command, you could load a file that is in RDS format directly into Radiant or into R, and this one as well. This is a file this is another file that's directly available on GitHub. This one is Dropbox, right? So both of those will work. All right. Now, the next step here is rename the DVD dataset to DVD URL, because we ended up pulling it from a URL. So maybe that's a good way to distinguish it, because actually, if you look in your files, data manage, we also have a DVD file here, which we're gonna end up using later on. Okay, so now in data manage again, I want to rename this particular data set, right? The data frame. And so I can just click on rename and then type DVD URL, click on rename, and now our data set has been renamed to DVD_URL. Okay. So what I see is that I loaded a file directly from a remote URL, from a remote server, and there's no description attached to this data set. Now, this is not the most complicated of data sets, but trust me, once you've not looked at data for a while, you'll start to forget what exactly the different variables mean. Okay? So, for example, coupon says 543. What is that? It's probably the value of the coupon that somebody received, but it's not obvious. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a description to this data set. And so click on Add Edit Description. And now there's a text editor here where I can either type information or, and I have this available in the Introduction to Radiant document, I can just copy and paste what I have here. This is a previously created description of the data set. And you'll notice some things here, right? So there's stars here, which are going to turn into bullets in a second, and these hashtags. So this basically means, for example, up here, a hashtag, 2 hashtags means a title of size 2. This means a title of size 3, and so on. So I'm just going to copy that into a Radiant and then into this input. And so again, you can edit this as you would like. You can add as much or as little as you like. And when you're done, click on Update Description. And now this has been transformed into a little more nicely formatted HTML. Okay? And so once I save this, if I go ahead and save this to disk, then and let's go ahead and do that. Just click on Save, and I'm going to add that to the data manage. It's going to be DVD URL, save. Now, if I were to load that up at any point in the future, there will be this attached description of what is actually in the dataset, which is kind of convenient. And again, this is something that I highly recommend anytime you use data that you haven't seen before. Try to figure out exactly what's in the dataset and add as much information as you can. Okay. We did that. We added the description. One thing that it asks for is click on the SDR button. What does that do? That gives you the structure of the data file. So this is a short description. It's a data frame with 20,000 observations, 5 variables. There's a factor, by, with the different levels, a coupon with different values, and so on. And you can see that an attribute has been added to this data frame, which is this description of the data set. And our Radiant, when it sees an attribute that is called description attached to a data frame, it'll automatically convert that into a nice looking piece of HTML that you can read at your convenience. Another button up here is summary. If you want to get a quick summary overview of what's in your data set. You can see here that the number of missing values, the number of distinct values in coupons, so that goes from 1 through 5, the mean, the median, and a bunch of different other summary statistics. For a factor, or a categorical variable, that's a little harder to summarize, but you see that there are 5,246 yeses, people that bought, and the remainder were people that did not buy. All right. Okay, so we haven't done a lot of work just so far, but it is useful to often save what you've been doing. And there's a nice feature inside Radiant that will allow you to save everything that you've done so far into what I'll call a state file. Okay? So if I click on the save, the floppy disk icon here, and then click on Save Radiant State File, I'm going to name this Radiant state file, and go ahead and save that. Now, if at any point in the future I would like to get back to exactly where I left off, so the work that I've done, I can go back into this particular drop-down menu by clicking on the floppy disk icon or the save icon, load state file. I can get back exactly where I left off. Now, what I'd like to do is show you what that would look like if you were to load a state file with work that you had done previously. So you can see again that you're going to get back to exactly where you left off. Now, when you load a state file, again, that's all the settings that you've changed or altered inside Radiant. When you load one, when you already have some work available in a current setting, that will all be blown away because it's going to restore itself to exactly the state it was in the last time you were working with the state file you just loaded. And so what's safer to do here is to use the following. Click on the power icon, click on New Session. This way I can keep the work that I have been doing, right? I can continue on with that if I like. And now in this new session, I can go ahead and load a previous state file. And I'm going to load this from Data Manage, and then the Radiant Viz state file, which has a little visualization that I did previously. So let's load that back in. You'll see by default we're in the Data Manage tab. But the last time I was working in Radiant, and when I generated this state file that we just loaded, I was actually in the Visualize tab. And you can see a bunch of different settings that were available there. One is I had a filter set. Right? And so this is the diamonds data set, and diamonds have different prices. And so I'm going to see a visualization based on data for only those diamonds that had a price larger than 1,000. Okay? What type of plot was I working on? I was working on a scatter plot. I was using all the data points available instead of just a subset. I had selected price and carat, so the carat of the diamond versus the price of the diamond, that's going to be the scatter plot. And then there's some other characteristics such as facet row, which means I'm going to cut the plot into different blocks related to the clarity of the diamond. And we also changed the color of the dots in the scatter plot depending on the color, on the clarity of the diamond. So let's take a look and see what we get out of that. Okay, so here is the scatter plot. And so this has been, again, chunked into different components. So each level of clarity gets its own subplot, and it also gets its own color. Okay? And so this is just to give you an idea of what you can do with a state file. This is the only thing I did in this particular state file. It's not super interesting, but you can at least see that I can easily get back to the exact states where I left off. And again, it's safer to do this in a new session. So if you do have some work in another session you want to keep, just click on power icon and then new session, and then you can go ahead and load any state file you like without worrying about what happened to this other one. All right. So, yep. Okay, so let's move on. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do in Data Visualize. There's actually a couple more lines in the intro.html file with some things that you can play around with. But we're going to move on to help. Right? And so whenever you're using a new programming language or a new tool, it's good if there's some help, and there is. So for example, if I want to know more about plotting in Radiant, I can click on this little help or question mark icon here at the bottom left. And there's a bunch of information about setting up plots. There's a broader range of help available by clicking on the question mark icon in the navigation bar. Click on help. Now there's a whole bunch of different pages that I can select. And so I can select, for example, something about design of experiments or the probability calculator. I can look at those one-on-one. Or suppose that I wanted to know something about applying a log transformation to my data. And I don't remember exactly where I did that last, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in the data menu, right? So somewhere in this, if I click on here, the tabs that are part of the data menu. And so if I want to select all of these, I can of course go one by one, or should just select this checkbox. It'll select all the help pages that are part of the data menu. And now if I use my browser's search functionality, I can type log, and I can see that I can change log transformations on some variables in the Visualize tab. But I can also apply the log function, the natural log, through data transform. Right? And so I can pretty easily find the information on whatever it is I want to try and do inside of Radiant. Okay, now let's show a couple more things inside the data menu. So I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to choose. I'm here in this new session that I created, Data Visualized. I'm going to go to the View tab, and I'm in the Diamonds data set. And so a couple things that I can do in here. This is sort of like a spreadsheet, except you can't manually edit values. And this is actually a good thing because there's almost no condition in which it is a good idea to manually edit data. If you're going to do any changes, make any changes to your data, you should do that through code that is documented somewhere, so everybody, including yourself, can see exactly what changes you made to your data. So if I go back again to my intro file, so now I'm looking at data view, I'm going to do some searching and some filtering, and then create a data set and add that to my Radiant session. All right, so I've got this filter set, and so how many prices are above 1,000? I can scroll down and I see that there are 2,184 entries with a price over 1,000. If I want to know how many there are in total, I can just uncheck that box, and now I can see that at the bottom here there are 3,000 entries in total in my data set. Okay. I've sorted, by the way, now in descending and ascending order. Suppose I want to sort on multiple things. Let's say I want to sort on clarity, and then within that on cut, I can press now the shift key, and then press on cut. And now I'm going to sort first on clarity, and then within clarity on cut. Okay, so it's very easy to quickly sort in a variety of different ways. If you want to get rid of whatever sorting or filtering you did, just click on Clear Settings, and now we're back to our original. All right, so there's a search box at the top here, which is pretty flexible in that I can now type something in here, and it will search across all columns in my data set for any occurrence of the word good. Okay. Now, that means it's going to choose very good as well as good, but nothing else, right? So this is the only column actually where there's good or very good. Now suppose I do the following. I just search on G. Now what you should see is that this row has now been added. This wasn't visible before because there is actually a G in this other column, the color column, and that's going to be now part of our search results. So again, this is just a pretty flexible way to search through your data and see if there are any occurrences of particular strings. All right, let's get rid of that. Now, suppose I've done some filtering where I've got price larger than 0, and this is a subset of the data that I'd like to save or export or send to somebody else so that they can work with that. They're not interested in the cheaper, relatively speaking, cheaper diamonds. So how do I save that data file? Well, one is what I could do is just click on this download icon. Right? As soon as I do that, it's going to ask me if I want to save a particular file. So I could save this as diamonds 1K, save it wherever I like, and then ship that off to somebody else. This is going to be a comma-separated file that anybody who has access to a spreadsheet could open up. Okay? What I could also do, if this is a data set that I want to work with separately inside of Radiant, I want to keep it, I can go to the bottom left here and say, store the filtered data as diamonds 1K. Click on Store. And now it says a dataset diamonds 1K was successfully added to the datasets dropdown. Well, let's see if that's actually true. Here's the datasets dropdown, and here we see diamonds 1K is now also available. Okay. So again, I can use these download icons, clicking on those to download the data to a drive in a format which is usually going to be CSV. All right. So that's just a quick way to get a view of your data. I showed you a little bit about visualizations. You can create a plot. Again, this is a plot filtered on just the diamonds that are more expensive than $1,000. Suppose I want to do the plot for all diamonds. I just uncheck. Now it says, hey, you know, something changed in your settings. Or do you want to update the plot? So you see this little spinning set of arrows. That's an indication that some of your settings have changed. Click on Update Plot. And now what you should see is that there's a few more dots available here because now we've got information about all the diamonds, including the ones that are a bit cheaper, right? So closer to the zero line. All right. So the next part of the Introduction to Radiant document talks about doing some transformations. So let's do those. So the first thing it asks us to is to load the DVD dataset from Data Manage, so we'll do that. So this is a one that was already previously available. You see the DVD URL, but I want to load the dvd.rds. It's available here, and you see that this file already had a description attached to it, so we know exactly what's in that dataset. Now, one thing that's a little silly about this dataset is it doesn't have any information about which customer or respondent, if we were doing an experiment, the particular information is from. And so a good strategy or a good practice with data is to add an ID variable. So we can do that in data transform. There's a variety of different transformations that we could apply here. Probably the most common one you're going to use is create. So I'm typing this in now, and this gives me create, but I could also just scroll to that through the drop down here for transformation type within the data transform tab. Now, if I want to add an ID, I could just choose a variable name, for example, ID. That seems to be a pretty good one. And now I could give this a numeric value, for example, 1 through 20,000. So 1 through 20,000. Nothing's happened yet. I just typed in some stuff. Now, if I press enter, what I'm going to see on the right-hand side is a preview of what would happen to my data set if I ran that code. And so what it's saying is, oh, here's a new variable that you would add. It's called ID. It doesn't have any missing values, 20,000 different distinct numbers, which is good because I want a unique ID for each customer, and then some summary statistics. Now the summary statistics are actually a bit odd because literally what I'm creating here is just a label for people, right? It's not actually numeric in a sense, it's just so I can distinguish one customer or one respondent in an experiment from another. So maybe a better variable type rather than a numeric or an integer variable is why don't I create a character variable? And so I could do that as follows. I'm going to do paste 0, and then in between brackets I'm going to say C for customer, and then make sure to close the bracket and then press enter. Now what would have happened, just as a demo here, what would have happened if I forgot to close the brackets here? Press enter. Now I see that something went wrong. Right? There's an error message that, hey, unexpected end of input. Yeah, because there was no bracket here at the end. Okay, so it's always good to type this and then press enter to see the preview. But once you're done with that, and now you're like, okay, I'd like to add this to the data set. This hasn't happened yet. You can see here, these are the variables in the data set. Press store. And now ID has been added here as the last variable in my data set. It's a variable type character. All that's good. And here's the code that you would use to create this particular variable added to your data set. This is part of the dplyr verbs called mutate. All right. So one thing I don't like about this is that the ID variable is at the end. It doesn't really matter, but what I'd like to do is actually have that be at the front. And so there's a feature in the transformation type dropdown. So I'm just going to scroll down until I see remove reorder variables. So let's click on that. And now what it's showing me here is a bunch of different buttons for the different variables that are available. So for example, if I click on this X here, it would remove the ID variable. But I don't actually want to remove it. I want to move it to the front. So I literally just clicked on it and now I'm dragging it to the top. Again, nothing has changed in my data set yet. I just see the preview here. Is this what you'd like? If it is, then go ahead and click store. And now you'll see that that a command has been generated here called select, which is another one of the dplyr verbs, where we've got the DVD dataset and the ordering of the variables that we want in that particular dataset. Okay, all right. All right, now, of course, what I should be doing, let's do that actually. Go to Data Manage where we've got our DVD data set. I'm going to go ahead and add this to my report here. So this is an example report that I don't need. I'm just going to get rid of that. And this is the code that is generated to load the data set. Now let's actually run this code and see what happens to the ID variable that we just added. Okay. There's no printed output, so we don't see anything. Let's go back to DVD, and oh goodness, our ID variable has disappeared. Now why is that? Because we loaded a clean version of the original data set, the DVD data set, directly from disk through this code. And so that data set does not have an ID variable in it. So how did we add that? Well, we added that through data transform, and the code to do that is right here. In fact, it has two pieces of code, one to generate the ID variable and one to move it from the end up to the front. So let's also add that into our report by clicking on the report icon. Okay. Now again, if I run this piece of code, I'm just going to load the clean dvd.rds dataset, which doesn't have an ID variable. But once I now run this piece of code, just this last block, where I'm generating the ID variable and moving it in front in the dataset, now I go back to data, and you'll see that here it is. Here is my ID data, my ID variable. And so this is the way in which you should think about developing a report, where of course you add some text to describe what you're doing and why, but this is reproducible because it starts from a data set that presumably everybody in your team has access to, a clean original data set. We load that and then we make changes by writing code, right? Or in this case by having Radiant write it for us, which is kind of convenient. Okay, now the next step in Intro HTML is let's load the sales.csv dataset. Okay, let's load the sales.csv dataset. Let's see, yep. Data and manage, CSV, load. We're in data manage. Go ahead and load that. And here's our sales.csv dataset. Now, let's go back to data transform, where it asks us to do the following. Select the sales variable. Okay, now as soon as I select that, this is kind of convenient when you're doing transformations. You get some information about the variable. So this is because the transformation type is currently set to none, aka summarize in this case. If you just select a variable here, it's going to give you some information, some summary statistics about that particular data set. And you'll see, as I'm using the arrow keys on my keyboard right now, as I just move through these different variables, it'll provide me summary statistics for each of the different variables selected. Okay, so here's sales, and what I see here is the median value for sales. Now, what is the median? The median is the middle value of sales, right? And so what would be a way to figure out if that has actually been calculated correctly by just looking at the View tab? Okay, so why don't you pause the video for a second and then see if you can figure out how you would do that, and then when we get back, I'll tell you how you could do it. All right, so again, the median value is the middle value. And so to figure out what the middle value is, I need to sort my data set. And so I'm going to sort it in ascending order here. And so we've got 365 observations. So 183 should be the middle one. So let's page through our data set until we get to 183. And so this should be 181, 182, 183, 1,435. And in data transform, we had 1,435. Okay, so that's just a simple way in which you can view your data from different angles and ensure that what you're looking at is indeed correct. Okay. Okay, so here's some problems with the data. First, there's something wrong with the date here. What in particular is that it's specified as a character rather than an actual date. And so this is something that we want to fix. So as you can imagine, there is a transformation for that, particularly the change type. And so there are a variety of different types that you can change a variable into. And in fact, there's a variety of different date types or date formats that you can use. Now, if you look at this data set, what does the 1 represent, do you think? Well, if you're from the US, your first reaction is probably going to be, that means the month. If you're from anywhere that's not the US, you're probably thinking, this is the day, and the second one is going to be the month. So if this is data from the US, then it's probably the case that this is the month. If it's not from the US, basically anywhere else in the world, this means that this is actually the day. So let's go take a look and see if we can figure this out. So let's sort by date. This is going to look weird because it's literally sorting it as if it were a character variable. But if we're doing some sorting, we can already see that, okay, it is not possible that the second value is actually going to be the month. Okay, so that means that the first one is likely the month, and the second one is likely the date. So likely data from the US. Okay, so let's change type, and then let's choose the format like this, which is MDY, which stands for month, day, year. Let's select that. And we haven't stored this data yet. It's still a character variable here. And then we see that we don't see any errors or we don't see any missing values. And I know in advance that this was data from January 1st, 2015 until the end of 2015. So that looks like it's working correctly. Let's go ahead and hit store. The command to generate this, to transform this from a variable called of type character to a date, is right here. And so we can go ahead and add that to our report in a minute. In fact, why don't we do that? I had my sales data, I loaded that through CSV. Let's go ahead and add that to my report and then go to data transform. And I'll wait for a second because there's a couple more transformations that I want to do. All right, so one thing that I'm going to be interested in is the sales per month. Right, so sales per day are going to vary quite a bit. But what if I just look at the sales? And let's actually do that. Let's do a data visualize. And let's choose we can do a scatter plot. Let's do a scatter plot where we are going to plot sales against the date. See if there's anything else. No, that's fine. All right. So you see there's a lot of variation in here. Okay, so it's a little bit hard to see what's going on. So maybe it would be a good idea to, instead of per day, calculating this per month and kind of get a feel for how sales vary over time. So I don't have a variable called month or anything like that, but I know that I have a date variable, and it's possible to extract information about what month we're actually talking about by using the date variable. So we'll choose create again, and again I'm pressing backspace or delete, create. I find this an easy way to get to that menu item because I use create a lot here. And so now I'm going to do a sales month. Okay, I could choose to name it whatever I like. Is equal to, I'm going to do something with the date variable. In particular, I'm going to use this function called month, which is part of the looper date package, date, and press enter. Let's see what that does. All right, so what this function does, which is part of the looper date package, is it extracts the month information from the date variable. Right? So date is right here. It extracts the month information. And you can see that there are 12 distinct values because we've got a year worth of data. But I don't really like that there's numbers here. I prefer to have some type of a label. And so the month function has an argument called label. And I think you just say this is true. Yep. So if you just add the argument, comma, label is equal to true, it's now going to give you a label to look at. In fact, this is going to be a factor, a categorical variable. Let's see if it's ordered in the correct order. Yes, it is. Let's go ahead and add that to our data set. Store. Now suppose that for some reason the ordering of the months had not been as you'd liked it. Right? You wanted it to be January. Let's say you wanted it to be December the first level and January the last. Could you change that? Sure. Just go to remove reorder levels, and now I can move around these different levels in any way that I like. Okay. Now, I'm not going to change it here because this is actually the order that I like. So I don't actually have to change anything. I can just move straight into, let's see, I've got that. Got the label. Okay, so that's all fine. So now I'm going to just add these pieces of code, which are the pieces of code to create the month variable. And to transform the date variable into an actual date, just add that to the report. See if this worked. Yep. So here's my R code. So again, if I run this command here, I would load back the sales.csv file, and my date variable is gone, and the month variable is gone, and date is back to a character. It's not a problem though, because I already have the code generated to transform this date variable into an actual date, and to add my sales month variable. Right. Now, what can I do with this? A couple different things. I can make all kinds of tables here. So I'm going to show you a pivot table through the pivot tab, where I am going to use as the categorical variable sales month. And then I'm going to select a single numeric variable, which is sales, and calculate the mean sales per month. That's what this is going to do. And so here's a pivot table. Now, that's sort of nice, but what I'd like to see as well is a plot. And so I can, of course, start doing this in the Data Visualize tab as well, but there's a little shortcut to doing that here. So click on Show Plot, and now I've got a bar chart of the sales across different months. Now this is nice because I get a nice flow of how things change over time, but suppose I want to sort that. Well, I can just click on the sorting mechanism for the table, and I'll scroll back down. Now I see that August is the one that seems, and we're not looking at statistical differences here, but purely based on our sample, August has the highest value and January has the lowest value of sales. Right? You can do things like conditional formatting, so that will actually add some information to your table here. So it's sort of like putting a bar chart inside of your table, which is kind of nice. All right, now the next question here, and again, I keep looking back to the HTML file here, is make a plot to check how many sunny days there were in each month. All right, so I'm looking at sales month. I am not going to do any type of numerical calculations. I just want a frequency table. And so what I need is a variable that tells me whether it's been sunny or not. And so we have a variable explicitly for that. So let's check on that. Again, it shows you here that you must have changed some settings because this table on the right here is now out of date compared to the settings that you've put in. So let's click on Update Pivot Table. And here is our plot and our table. We don't actually need the conditional formatting, so let's get rid of that. All right. So the question that it asks here, what is going on in May? So this is data from San Diego, and you can see that in every month, there's lots more sunny days than there are cloudy days, except in May. Now this is a weather phenomena in San Diego that May tends to be grayer than most other months, as in more overcast, and so we call that May gray. June gloom is another one, which means that June tends to be a bit more gloomy. So you see there's about just about the same number of cloudy and sunny days, and even July in 2015 seemed to have slightly more cloudy days than sunny days. Right? But again, all other months in the year, we have a dominance of sunny over cloudy days. What was the sunniest month? Okay, so I can look at this plot, and that sort of works. But what about doing some of this with the table? So if I wanted to look at the table, I'm just actually going to reshuffle these, because now I'm going to get a table in a slightly different order, right? So sunny is now the first variable here, and the second variable is sales month. And what I wanted was the sunniest month. So let's sort the data, and we can now see that November was the sunniest month. Okay, let's see what my bar chart looks like. It's a little hard to see in here, but you can again see that this bar is the highest. So of the months and the number of sunny days, we can see that this color, which happens to be November, yes, so November was actually the sunniest month. Now, of course, this is a little tricky because February doesn't have the same chance, basically, of winning because it has fewer days. But we get some idea of the level of sunniness across different periods. Now, the next thing that is asked in the Intro to Radiant HTML document is let's go to the Explore tab. So let's do that. So pivot is just for pretty simple tables. So things like this, like frequency tables, or to summarize one particular numeric variable. But explore is a little more flexible in that it can give you lots of summary statistics for lots of different variables, potentially grouped by other variables. So what's the question? What is the mean for sales per month? That's the first one. So let's click on sales, create table. And we actually get a bunch of summary statistics by default because we've got a bunch of different variables that are selected here, or functions, sorry, selected here to specify what type of summary statistics we get. So we get the number of observations, the mean, the minimum, maximum, and standard deviation. If I just wanted the mean, I would just get rid of the other variables. And so now Radiant knows that you've changed the settings. So let's just click on Update Table, and now we see just the mean. Right. The next question is, what's the mean, median, variance, standard deviation of sales, cups, and average spend? All right, so let's first select the variables we want. So sales, cups, average spend. And so I'm doing this by clicking on either Control or Command to select multiple variables, or I can use Shift to select multiple variables at the same time. And then it asks me for the mean, median, and variance. So let's select those. Mean, where's the median? Median and variance. If I wanted to change the order, I could just move these around. Click Update. And so here's a set of summary statistics in a table. Actually, that's a question. Move the standard deviation. Did I ask for standard deviation? Yes, I did in the document, but I didn't add it in here. So let's do that. That's SD. Update. Okay. And now the question here is, move the standard deviation and variance to the first two columns of the table. Okay. So variance and standard deviation are now going to be in the first two columns. Update table. There we go. All right. Let's store this table. Now this is kind of nice because maybe I want to do something with this particular table, and I want to use that in a visualization or something else. I can either download this to CSV, as we did before, or I can hit store. And so what I'm going to store this as, sales. This is for Explore, but you can call it whatever you like. Click on Store. And we again get a drop down or a modal here, which says, hey, there's a dataset sales underscore EXPL that was added to the datasets drop down. Let's check if that's true. Yep, there it is, sales XPL. So I can do other things with that later on, for example, a visualization. All right, let's add the code for the work that we did here to our report by clicking on the report icon. And again, here is our code down here. Now, by default, if you click on this, so let me just run this piece of code, we'll just get a pretty plain looking summary table. If that's not what I want, I can go into my code and make some edits. So I don't need the basic summary table, but I want a fancier one, which is an interactive table. So let's run this piece of code, just this bit. And so now I've got a fancier looking interactive table that I can sort, I can filter, I can do a variety of different things in. And so this is just a slightly nicer looking version that you can actually save to a report if you like later on. All right, now the last piece, I think, data visualize, yes. We're going to do some visualizations, do some distribution plots, and some other things here. And that's going to be our last main thing that I'm going to demo. All right, so we are looking at the sales data still. So data visualize. And let's say I want to get a distribution plot. And distribution just means it's either going to be a histogram or a frequency plot of different levels of a variable. Okay, so if it's quantitative, it's going to be a histogram. If it's not quantitative, it's going to be a frequency plot. Right? And so I am now going, this is one for one variable selected. I'm going to show you that. That's going to be pretty big. But I want this actually for all my variables. So one way to select all the variables is just scroll down, press Shift, click on the last one. Now all the variables are selected. Press Update Plot. And now we've got histograms or frequency plots for all the variables in our data set. Right, so that's pretty quick to get. I create a bar chart with sales as the Y variable and sales month as the X variable. Let's do that. We can choose a bar with sales as our Y variable, and what's the X variable? Sales month. Right. update plot. Here we go. So this is the same, I'll make this a bit smaller. This is the same plot that we were looking at. In fact, what I'd like to do is this plot is rather tall for the demo. So let me just change the size of this a little bit. I'm going to click on Style here and say, you know what? I don't need it to be quite that high. So let's just do 400. Okay. Now if we go back, we'll see that it's not quite as tall. And it's a little easier to, whoops, don't know what I just did there. Something with antivirus. It's a little easier to see here on screen. Okay, so there's a bar chart. Add mean sales per month as the plot title, right? There's no title here. So here I could change the style, but I can also add a label. So let's click on labels, and the title was mean sales per month. Okay, oops, let's add that. By the way, what is the bar chart doing? It's creating information on the mean of sales. Suppose I wanted something else, then I could choose instead of mean some other function that I wanted to use in summarizing and creating the bar charts. But mean is probably the most common that you're going to find. And now I'm going to update my plot, and we'll see there it is, mean sales per month. Now, we want to see if the sales pattern across months looks different depending on whether a day is sunny or not. And so there's a couple different ways in which you could do this. We could either say, let's just split the data set up into whether we're looking at a sunny day or not. So we could do facet row. Okay, so now I have two rows of plots, if you will, one for cloudy, one for sunny. If you don't like that, we could, instead of facet row, do facet column. And so now it's side by side. Or, and this is actually, I think, pretty nice here, I could choose a different fill option, click sunny, update the plot, and now I see a side-by-side bar chart where I can see sunny and cloudy, and again the data has been separated into these two, but it's a different way to visualize the particular bar chart. Okay, so you can choose whichever one you like that you think conveys the message most clearly about what it is you want to tell others. Okay. And then the last bit is, let's focus the plot only on cloudy days. Interesting. So what is this plot going to look like if we only look at, so price is a filter here, but of course there's no price in this data set. You'll see an invalid filter message here. Let's say sunny, right, that's a variable that we're using right now to separate the data set, is equal to cloudy. Let's see what we get. Aha. So it's still using the variable here to fill, but sunny variable now only has one level, which is cloudy. And so, this is just a bar chart, same as filter. So we don't actually need that fill component here. Another question that's asked in the HTML document is focus the plot on the period after on and after June 1st in 2015. Okay, let's do that. We have our date variable in our data set, right? The date is larger than or equal to, between quotes, 2015, 6. Now this, by the way, is the default format for dates in R and pretty much anything else. Start with the year, then the month, and then the day. And so we can use these logical symbols here, so larger than or equal. And so now we're only going to look at those those pieces of the data that where the date is larger than or equal to this value, and separate a bar chart. And you can see, of course, that we don't get information for January, February, and so on, because we have a filter specified. If we want to get back to the full data, just uncheck the filter box, and here's our full data again. Okay. There's a couple other filtering things that I'll just leave for you to work on your own. The last thing I want to share you again, because I think it's rather important, is the saving of the state files. And so I'm going to click on the Save button, Save Radiant State. And again, this is going to save all the work that I've done in this demo here, in this particular session. Right? So I had this separate session that I was working on as well. But in this particular session, I'm going to save that And do I give a suggestion of what to call it? Well, doesn't really matter. Let's call it Radiant State Demo. Let's save that. And just as proof, and by the way, why don't I go ahead and add this plot to my report as well. Let me just save again, because I'm going to demo in a second. Radiant State File Demo, that was what I called it. Okay, overwrite the old one. And suppose I just go ahead and click on the power icon and hit refresh. What that will do is get me back to a clean slate. All the settings have been removed, right? So there's nothing in Visualize, there's nothing in Report except just the demo report that's always in there. And so now if I go back to state, what should happen if I load the state file that I just created, which is Radiant State File Demo, I should get back to the last tab that I was on, which was the Report tab, where I had just added this visualization. Okay. All right, so that's loading and saving state files. The last thing I want to show you is about creating reports. And so if I click on knit report here, it's going to knit my report and show me the things that I've done. And so there's not a whole lot in here actually. So I just loaded some data files and I did some transformations. The only thing that's actually visual that I can see that I stored in my report is the table that I generated with some summary statistics and the plot. But suppose I want to save that to some format that I could share with others. Well, there's a couple of different formats that I could choose. For example, I could save to a standard HTML, I could save to a notebook, I could save to PDF, I can even save to a PowerPoint if I like. But the most common one that I'll recommend you use for now is just a notebook. So let's save that. Radiant Report Demo, that sounds fine. Click on Save. And now let me go ahead and see if I can find that. Where is it going to be? That's going to be in my Git. I think that's where I put it. Radiant. Yep, here it is. So here's the notebook.html file that I just saved. Let's double click on that to open it. And so here's information about, I can show all the code. This is all the code that I used to write my report, but I can go ahead and hide that if I like. Hide all code. Now there's just buttons here that if I want to show pieces of code that were run, I can do that. Here is the code for generating my table, but again, I can hide it. Here's the interactive table, because this is an HTML file. And so there's some JavaScript embedded in here that allows you to do sorting and filtering. And here's the file, the plot that we made at the end there with the title mean sales per month. All right, so I hope this gives you an idea of how the basics of Radiant are set up, and I hope that'll be enough information to get you started when you start using this in your fall classes.